All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mic'd in New Haven podcast, episode 57. I'm going to throw Jet fans a bone. It's Bart Scott number. Bart Scott wore number 57 on the Jets. If you're a Yankee fan, it's Chad Green number. He wears number 57 too. So this is going to be part one of a mini series of the Mic'd in New Haven podcast coming this week, Tales from the Boom Room. This week's a big week for the podcast because we have today, my next guest who I'll introduce in a moment, who's a retired detective from the Arson Explosion Squad, and tomorrow, retired NYPD bomb squad detective Dan McNally. But today, my next guest is a man who spent 2 decades working the streets of New York City as an officer and later detective in the NYPD, as I mentioned. Joining the force in 1984, his career saw him work in units such as street crime, the Organized Crime Control Bureau, and most notably, the Arson and Explosion Squad, where he investigated numerous arsons and bombings, including apprehending a serial arsonist who'd been targeting the Jewish community in 1995, as well as assisting with the investigation into the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. In 2004, he retired with the rank of detective first grade, and since then has kept active in the field of investigations, currently running his own private investigative agency, the Ryan Investigative Group. Retired NYPD detective first grade, Bill Ryan, joins me now on the Mic'd in New Haven podcast. Bill, pleasure to have you. Welcome. How are you?
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. The pleasure's all mine. Like I said, part one of a really exciting miniseries I'm amped up about. So we kind of talked about it prior to you coming on the show, but my listeners haven't heard your background yet, and it's pretty interesting, so I want them to. So where'd you grow up? What were your early years like, and what were your interests?
I grew up in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn, but I was actually born in Washington Heights, lived in the Bronx earlier in my life, moved to Brooklyn. So I pretty much consider myself a Bay Ridge guy. That's where I grew up. That's where I was nurtured, went to school. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. I'm the son of Irish immigrants. My dad was a police officer, so I like to play the stereotype. The guys come over from Ireland, become cops, and their kids become cops. My interests early on, I'm a sci-fi junkie. Love all things sci-fi. Lost in Space, Star Trek, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Later on, my love of sitcoms made me want to do stand-up comedy, which is something I did for a while. And then, eventually I kind of floundered my way into becoming a cop. A lot of that was because my father wanted, I think like all parents, they want to see your kids settled. And I ended up taking the test, I think like the day after my 16th or 17th birthday. And I took it, and I got called when I was 20, and I turned down the first 2 times I was called, and I went the 3rd time, back when you could do that. And I was lucky. I worked with a lot of great people. I learned a lot of great things, and I spent most of my career in citywide units. Street crime was citywide, arson explosion was citywide. And what I loved about that, one of the things I loved about it was that you got to work every borough. You got to work every neighborhood. You just had a cross section of everywhere, from the toughest neighborhoods to the community neighborhoods. You were everywhere, and you kind of got a little taste of everything. Kind of a smorgasbord of the city. And since I'm a lifelong New Yorker and a big New York advocate, that always appealed to me.
It's interesting because I asked this to Bill. Bill also came on. Bill Cannon, I'm referring to, of course, the other Bill that's been on this podcast from the Police Off the Cuff program. For my listeners that don't know that, he joined the NYPD in 1985. You joined, like I said, in 1984, around that time period. And this was during a really chaotic time for the city, because the 80s, a lot of people talk about it that lived it, was the Wild West for the city. There's crime was through the roof. It was hit hard by the AIDS epidemic, I should say. And, the mafia was at the peak of their powers in terms of the control they had on the various aspects of the city. So when you graduated from the academy, I got to say, where was your first precinct, and what are some of the wilder stories that you can recall from your patrol years?
Well, when I first got out of the police, I got out of the police academy, or graduated in June of 1984. And I don't know how I got through it, because people like Manny Estacio and Andy Reyes and Keith Garley kept me going. I hated the academy. I always said if I had to go back, I'd quit. I mean, it just, I was more of a bohemian guy, who don't see things. I'm not good at yelling at. I've always had a problem with authority. So the academy was really tough for me. But once I got out, I went to they used to have things called neighborhood stabilization units. They cover like 3 precincts. I went to NSU 1, which covered the Lower East Side of Manhattan, the 1st precinct, which is Wall Street, 5th precinct, which is Chinatown, and the 7th precinct, which is Lower East Side. And I was there for 6 months and did a lot of walking. Wrecked a couple of police cars because I should have been a transit cop. That was always the joke because I was one of these guys that I had a license before I became a cop, but I never drove anywhere. I mean, I don't think I even owned a car till like maybe 1986. I mean, I'm a city guy. I take trains everywhere or car service, so I kind of learned to drive in a police car. But Lower East Side was a big thing with Pressure Point. There was a big drug problem. And that's what they pretty much had us on, being scarecrows on little streets. You'd have like 2 blocks, the next guy would have 2 blocks. And you were there to kind of keep the drug dealers at bay, but you're almost like scarecrows. But they also wanted to show you were out there doing things. And there's guys I work with in 6 months there that I'm still, tight with. And it was just a great experience. But it is when you're coming out like that. I think I was 21 or going on 22. I was with a lot of other young guys, so it's almost like I've since gone to college, but I hadn't gone to college then, and so this was like my college. My guys I went with and did things with. That was an exciting time. You're doing interesting things. I had money for the first time. I mean, real money, which was nice. And you're in Manhattan, so there's always plenty of exciting things to do. A lot of girls. I'm single, so all those things were very attractive to me. And I wasn't worried about a career, what was going on. I mean, I didn't know if I was going to stay on the job another 6 months. I always said, I think I had the great career that I had, partly because I never worried about having a career.
And you know what? That's a good way. It's a good way to look at it. I didn't mean to cut you off there. You had more to say.
I'm cutting up. I'll do all night.
We're talking with Bill Ryan here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Bill, a retired NYPD arson and explosion detective. You and I interact a lot in the police off the cuff live chat. And one of the things that you mentioned anytime that the unit is brought up is, anytime Bill or Mark brings up street crime, you love it. I mean, you're a huge proponent of street crime, which I think Commissioner Kelly, he disbanded that in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, right? Was he the one that got rid of street crime?
A lot of people, hands are on that. I won't put the blame on any one person. I mean, it is when the shooting happened of the vendor,
Diallo.
It just put the unit in such a bad light. And it's a very small unit, and it was just easier to say, okay, we'll get rid of it. And I don't think they realized the repercussions of that, until now. You have guys like us. I think at one point we were 12. We were like less than 1% of the police department, but we were taking like 15% of the guns that were seized.
Right.
Because that's all you did. You went out looking for violent crime, and they would put you in the precincts every night where there was a lot of shootings and robberies. And, like I said, they'll miss us when we're gone. And you see it now, crime's coming up. The big thing is, Mike, the bad guys were afraid to keep the gun on them because they were worried that we were going to go out there and find the guns on them. So they, you put it in a garbage can, you stick it in the car. And sometimes that minute or two when you've got to stop and go get the gun, maybe the guy runs away or, maybe things cool down. When you have it right there, you can just pull it out. It's more likely to get used. And, I think that's part of why you're seeing all the gun violence spike. And it's not just street crime. I mean, they got rid of the whole anti-crime program.
Yep.
And, people are now not, the bad guys aren't afraid to carry the guns anymore.
I remember talking with Leonard Levitt, the late Leonard Levitt, who I was sad to learn passed away last year. He was, of course, the longtime police reporter for Newsday. And we talked about that particular case because he said, and Len, I don't think Len was a cop hater. Len was fair. He defended the police when need be. He criticized when need be as well. But he said that was.
Super hater.
What was that?
Len was a Howard Safer hater. He didn't
Yeah.
like
Oh,
Howard.
yeah. I talked about that with him. Funny, quick aside before I continue. I remember asking him, like, given what you wrote during that time when Safer was commissioner from 1996 until 2000, when he left, you didn't like him very much. And he pauses in that I told Bill this story in that classic raspy New York voice of his. He says, he was a difficult man to like, and he said, we'll leave it at that. But he mentioned that when I asked him about that, that was the worst thing that he had seen. And a lot of people felt that way because, it was a series of errors that led to a horrible outcome. But nonetheless, as you said, street crime did a lot of good. And a spot in street crime wasn't given, it was earned. So, you have to make a series of busts to get you noticed. What kind of bust were you making? I mean, you kind of alluded to earlier, but was there a specific bust that people looked at you and said, you know what, let's get this guy in street crime?
No, at the time it happened, I was in a uniform detail. I was in what's called Zone 11 Quality of Life. Mm-hmm. I was set up really to, do the minutia stuff, beer drinking, radios, and things like that. But I was lucky that the area I covered, we had the 76th precinct, the 78th precinct, and I was a 7-8 cop. My partner at the time was a 7-6 cop. So they put us together and they gave us the project robbery card. So we had the Red Hook houses and the Gowanus houses, and we were working a lot in those areas, and that's where we're making a lot of our arrests. But we're very proud that we cut robberies down significantly when we were working. But we also had a great rapport with the community. We got a lot of intel for detectives to solve cases, and it was just one of those things where you don't want to do some of the things you have. Like I didn't want to write tickets anymore. I didn't want to handle accidents. And it was like, well, you really like street, you really like making arrests. Go to an arrest unit, and I was a little argumentative with some of the bosses, so I wasn't going to get into like street narcotics enforcement unit or things like that. And then ended up going to the street crime, and I was very lucky. You think you're hot stuff until you get with guys who are real hot stuff. I mean, when I got there, the guys that were there and the things that I learned, I'm like, I feel like I just walked out of the academy again. These guys were heads and tails of it. I learned from the best, and the best were all in street crime.
I got to say, when you're in street crime, one of the things about it is that you're not answering the radio. You're not looking at that as a way to get calls. You're really relying on your eyes and your ears. And that really sharpens your skill set as an officer. So besides that, though, what else would you say makes an effective street crime cop?
It's a lot like fishing. You have to be patient. If you've got to work off the radio, then you really shouldn't be in street crime, meaning like you hear a call for something and you're going to respond to. A lot of it's patience. You got to watch guys, see a pattern of behavior, be able to spend a lot of time on it. It's tough sometimes, especially, the night's getting on, you haven't made your arrests, you haven't done anything, it's towards the end of the month. And, there's quotas or production goals, every place has them. And, after a while, when you're not getting on, it's hard sometimes to sit there and say, all right, I'm watching this guy for a while. Is he going to rob somebody? Is he not going to rob somebody? Did I get made? Did I get burned? So patience is the biggest thing. You've got to be able to sit there and wait. You can't make it happen. You've got to wait for it to happen organically, or you've got to see them, adjusting their code, or sometimes you would do things like. You'd know what clubs in the city had metal detectors, and they'd wand guys, and you'd see them turn a guy away, and he'd maybe go back to his car or something, take his gun out and he'd throw it in his car, and you're like, hi, you're right there for him. And, there's a lot of, tricks of the trade. It's something that I think, Bill Cannon and I have talked about on his show, where these are skills that are going away, and the people that have them aren't coming back. And watching how, because like when cops carry guns, we usually have holsters. They're on our belt. Yeah. They're on an active holster. Bad guys tend to not have holsters, so they're always adjusting an area. They're always looking for the gun, making sure it doesn't make a move. And it's a skill. I mean, I can teach anybody how to do it that's willing to learn, but you've got to be out there doing it. You know what I mean? You're a baseball fan. I can tell you how to hit a ball. But until I get you in the batting cage and showing you how to do it, you're never really going to learn how to do it.
Right.
I can correct your stance, I can correct this and that, but until I put the bat in your hand and you start swinging, you really don't.
You don't get that. You don't get the hang of it. By the way, I was going to say, yeah, you're gonna. Never mind. Yeah. I wouldn't describe it as technological difficulties, but camera angles difficulties for those of you that have watched the video version of the Mike to New Haven podcast. We're talking with Bill Ryan here on the Mike to New Haven podcast. More with Bill in just a second, but first let me get in this plug, because if I don't, she's going to be mad at me, and I'm referring to my older sister. My older sister is technically the first sponsor of this podcast. Free advertising for her because she's not paying me yet, but she will. And she has a page. It's a fashion page. So for those of you out there, and Bill, this includes you, whether it be your wife, whether it be your daughters, your sisters, your lady friends, whoever it may be, your girlfriends. She has a page called The Cozy Babe, TheKozie, Babe, Babe, where she does fashion blogging. So for those of you out there that have ladies in your life, or if you're a lady and you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in that stuff, go follow her on Instagram at that page. Back to Bill now. So cops have a lot of really dangerous calls, a lot of close calls, I should say, where, I remember, I'll never forget this conversation at my old college. I made good friends with a lot of the security guards. A lot of them are retired police officers down here in New Haven. And one guy did 29 years with New Haven PD. And I asked him about that one time when we were just spitballing in between my classes. And he said, sometimes I can still hear the bullets whizzing by my head. Because New Haven was a dangerous place in the 80s and 90s, and still is now, though less so. So that being said, for you, when you look back on those early years of street crime, were there any close calls that you had where you found yourself saying, wow, that I could have gotten killed there or seriously hurt?
Yeah, there was one time I was backing up, and when we went into street crime, we weren't assigned to the precinct, so we're going around and you would check in with the precinct and try to let people know, hi, this is me, and have the color of the day and all these things to identify yourself. At the end of the day, you're still a guy walking around in plain clothes with a gun, and you have to worry about your brother officers seeing you. And we were in the 75th precinct in East New York one night, and one of our teammates was making an arrest, and he was fighting with the guy getting pulled into a hallway, and then I got pulled in trying to help him pull the guy out, and his brother came in, piled on him, grabbing my gun. We're fighting over it. He was taking my gun and pointing it at me, and I was losing control of the weapon, and I was sure that that was going to be it. And I was lucky. He was trying to get him off me, hitting him with the radio, and eventually one of the other teammates heard me yelling on the radio, and we had emergency service and Brooklyn North Task Force come in, and it's funny, but no matter how big a crowd or how much noise is going on, the minute you hear emergency service chamber that shotgun round, it's like dead silence. And we got out of there. We were okay, but it was a big problem. A lot of people fighting with us. Tons of civilian complaints came out of it. The precinct commanding officer didn't want us back in the precinct anymore. It was crazy, but I was pretty sure that was one of the times where I probably wasn't going to go home that night. But I mean, I think everybody who's out there doing the work, there's a lot of guys with the cops. My old mentor, late great Tom Nerney, used to call guys NCFs, non-crime fighters, and like, well, he's a cop, but he's more of a clerk. He's not out there doing the job. And it's the same guys always making the arrest. You go down to central booking, it's probably the same 50 guys in every borough making all the arrests. So I think the guys who are active like that, they've all got stories like, because you're confronting, you're going after bad guys. You're going after the guy with the gun. You're going after the robber. You're going after the guy who's a raper. So that was one of the times. I mean, I had some close calls on narcotics. But I mean, there's also things like, again, when you're working in plain clothes and you're not part of the precinct. I remember when I was in street crime, one of my first nights on 42nd Street, when this is before it was pre-Disneyfied and it became more user-friendly. We're dressed up like vagrants. We're on the street. We're watching things. And I'm watching these guys across the street who I think are going to be doing something suspicious. And next thing you know, the rookie cop that had the street, she's coming down, and I guess she just thought we were vagrants. Sorry, I have more tech problems here. And
No worries.
you know, it's she's telling us, she's hitting us with a stick. Hey, get out of here. And I'm pulling up my sleeve. I'm showing her the color of the day. It's like a street crime. I'm watching these guys across the street, and I don't think she either. I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say she either didn't hear us or didn't understand what it meant, and she starts pushing us with the stick. And we're like, all right, we'll leave. And she got a little aggressive and picked the stick up like she was going to hit me. As I grabbed the stick, I'm like, ow. And the mounted cop at the block, all they see is this officer with this guy holding her stick like she's in a fight.
Uh-huh.
They don't understand. And here comes that cop charging with his baton in his hand.
Oh no!
I'm like, oh, this is going to be so bad. You have your shield out, you're pulling out the color, and and it was literally like he's almost like a cartoon. He stopped just before it ended up happening. But I mean, it happens. I mean, I've been mistaken for perps and dealt with by other cops where I've been grabbed, I've been cuffed. I mean, I get it.
Yeah, but it's dangerous because cops have gotten killed that way. I think the case that comes to mind for me is Omar Edwards, which I'm sure you remember back in 2009. That guy, for those of you that don't know who that is, he was a young officer. I think he had about 2 years on the job, and he's coming home one night. He's witnessing a break-in. Two people are breaking into a car. He does the right thing that a cop should do in that spot. He takes out his gun. He chases the perps. He's trying to collar them. A cop pulls up on the scene. Omar's not in uniform. He's in plain clothes. The cops doesn't know that Omar is a fellow cop. And he opens fire, and Omar gets hit, and Omar dies. He was only 25 years old. So it's a dangerous thing because, I mean, there was a case where this cop didn't die that night. He recently actually just died in a motorcycle crash in Florida. But you may remember in 1994 in transit, another cop was chasing a perp that had a gun. And there's another transit cop that comes in, doesn't know that cop's a cop, and opened fire on him and severely wounded him. So it's a dangerous thing when you're in situations like that.
Well, especially when you're in street crime. I mean, you're doing your best. I mean, street crime had a history of doing decoy, where they would dress up to be victims. That was done a little bit less when I got there. But you're trying your best to blend in, and again, because you're not part of the police community, most guys in the precinct know they're undercover guys and they're anti-crime guys. Not so much with us, and because we weren't ever going into uniform, we all looked shaggy with the beards, and
yeah.
It's mandatory when you go into anti-crime, you got to grow your beard. But you're so happy not to have to shave anymore. But it's a dangerous thing to working undercover. It's different when I say undercover. I mean plain clothes. I don't mean like undercover like the cops who go in and buy drugs. That's undercover narcotics work. But anytime you're not in uniform, you're taking the chance that you can be mistaken for the bad guy. And I've thank God nothing bad ever happened. I mean, I've had close calls, but nothing's ever happened. And but that's what you're signing up for. I mean, that's part of the game.
Yeah, that's true. So you worked in the Organized Crime Control Bureau for a little bit, as I mentioned when I was introducing you, or as it's known, OCCB. And when people think organized crime, naturally, because of all the movies and the documentaries and whatnot, the first thought that is, when you hear that term that comes to mind is, well, the mafia. But organized crime, it's much more than that. It's not just the mob. It's part of it, but there's a grander thing. I think it's any gang, any kind of organized criminal operation. So besides the mafia, what kind of organized crime, because I'm an outsider, I don't know this, organized crime syndicates does OCCB target? And what were some of the bigger cases that you worked on while you were there?
Well, I mean, when people say the mafia, they're talking, more about it, speaking about traditionally, Italian gangs. But I mean, I think every single ethnic group in the city or anywhere for that matter, they all have their version of the mafia, their version of organized crime. I mean, there's Chinese gangs, there's Korean gangs, there's Mexican gangs, there's Irish gangs. I mean, the Westies, just taking my own. But not that I had anything to do with that gang. But the Russians are a big gang in Brooklyn. I think as different groups come into power, they do more things. I mean, you see groups like the mafia works a lot with now the Russian groups. And what's kind of funny is as the federal police and police in general have been targeting traditionally the Italian gangs, the five families, you weaken them where there's not as much going on. I'm not saying there's no enforcement, there's not as much rather going on for like the Russian gangs, the Chinese gangs, the Mexican gangs. So as you're making the Italian gangs a little weaker, that void gets filled by these other groups. It doesn't mean you lock these guys up, someone else, there's always someone to replace them. Most of the work I ended up doing was with Hispanic outfits, and that was when I was in narcotics in Brooklyn North. So I didn't deal so much with the mafia directly. Although with that being said, the mafia is the one that helps bring in all these drugs into the country. So your suspect may be a black man or a Hispanic man, but somewhere in that chain, that package of drugs was probably touched by somebody in one of the Italian gangs.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I was watching a documentary, as I've been doing a lot since this pandemic began, on this. Australia had this really dangerous gang war, throughout the late 90s into the early 2000s. A series of really violent criminals were battling it out on the streets of Australia, particularly in Melbourne. And it was over that. It was over drugs. And so they were specifically, the police really, over there, they didn't handle it as well as I think the NYPD or the LAPD or any of the major police departments we have here would have. But what they did is they did just that. They targeted one specific syndicate so much so that at least here, as you say, there's still some kind of an enforcement. Over there was none. And it allowed all these other really dangerous figures to flourish. And of course, they met their own ends. They got killed by their rivals. But nonetheless, it's cause and effect in police work, as with a lot of things in life, but especially in police work. And if you don't keep your eyes on everything, well, then, you're going to see an increase in the ugly things of society. So moving ahead to why you were on this podcast, as this is, like I said, part one of a mini series. The Arson and Explosion Squad, which you spent the majority of your career in, 13 years, so 1991, all the way through the end of your career in 2004. I got to ask, it's pretty interesting. A lot of cops, when Bill Cannon first had you on Real Crime Stories, he'd never interviewed a guy from Arson and Explosion or the Bomb Squad before to that point. So you don't hear a lot of guys, at least in that show, talking about working in units like that. So why Arson and Explosion? Why that unit for you?
Well, for me, I mean, I knew it existed only because one of my partners in NSU, her uncle worked there, and so I'd heard about it from that. But I had gone to what was called the Brooklyn Career Criminal Investigation Unit, CCIU,
mm-hmm.
And I was excited about it, and it was part of it's funny that the unit no longer exists, but it was part of the larger group of the Special Investigations Division. And Special Investigation Division is like it's all the heavy detective bureau unit. It's got arson explosion, certainly. It had terrorist task force, major case, special frauds, missing person, computer crimes. It was just like, if you wanted to go to a great detail in the detective bureau, that's where you went. And I got lucky to go to CCIU. I made a bribery collar and I was able to use that and get into CCIU. And literally the morning I went in to sign in, I was one of 12 detectives that got sent there. There was a big brain drain and the retirements of missing persons. And the CO of missing persons, Bob Davis, complained to the commanding officer that he needed more guys. And so he said, all right, I'll give you the 12 guys that went to CCIU. And we were all spread out among the 5 boroughs. So that morning I come in, I have a cup of coffee. Lieutenant calls me and another detective, Yvette Plata, and said, come on in. And I think he was going to give me the talk. This is what I expect. This is what you need to be doing. And he's like, listen, don't unpack your bags. You're going to headquarters. I'm like, well, why? He goes, you've all been transferred to missing persons. And I was just like, are you kidding me? I just got, what did I do? Because you didn't do anything. Here's why you're going. And it's done. There's nothing we can do about it. And So the morning I was really excited about, next thing I know, I'm in headquarters. The problem with headquarters is, headquarters, for those who don't know, is in Lower Manhattan. Parking is ridiculously difficult. And it's also, you spend so many years passing the headquarters, like, oh, that's the palace. That's, you look down on it. Oh, those are the suits, the non-crime fighters, and it was funny when I got there, you realize how many guys there actually were crime fighters. But it was just a fluke that right place at the right time. I went there. I worked there for about 7 months. A bunch of guys retired from Arson Explosion. One of my sergeants, Frank Torres, the CO of the Arson Squad, Jerry Sheehan, lieutenant commanding officer, he said, "Hey, you looking for some guys? You got any guys you want to send over?" And he sent me over with another detective, Ronnie Sarr, another detective, Frank Saez, and we got transferred in there. And I'm like, "Listen, I don't know anything about fires. I don't know anything about bombs. I wasn't a city guy. I wasn't a volunteer fireman somewhere. I wasn't in the military. I've never handled explosives." Like, no, we don't do that. We don't do the what. We do the who. And if you can hunt people and do this, you'll do well here, and we'll send you for the training for other things. And I was just so excited because the unit had a great reputation, and it was a small unit. I mean, I was one of 12 detectives, and 12 detectives for a citywide unit really isn't that much. And it's also, it's one of the oldest detective squads I mean, it predates the terrorist task force. I mean, it's really an old squad that got morphed in when there was a lot of terrorist activities, like the Weather Underground and a lot of the 60s radicals, and it kind of formed out of that. And actually, it was a time when you had fire marshals and police detectives assigned to work together as part of teams, and that somewhere along the line, certainly before my time, got changed, where it was, we were in headquarters and they were in their fire bases. But it was just a fluke where I right place at the right time. I went into missing, kept my head down, did the work. I wasn't happy. I wasn't making overtime, but I knew that if I did a good job, I probably had a good chance of getting recognized because we're all on the same floor. We're helping them with their cases. They're helping them with ours. So there's a lot of cross-pollination with the squads, and I just got lucky.
And for those of you that don't know, and when I have Dan McNally on tomorrow, he could better explain it than I could. But the Arson Explosion Squad, as you just heard Detective Ryan allude to, they investigate the aftermath of a bombing or an arson. The bomb squad is tasked with responding to the scene itself, and if the package hasn't detonated yet, well, then that's when you'll see, and you've probably seen this on television, folks, where the guy puts the suit on, he goes in, he takes care of the package, and they do a great job. And you'll hear that tomorrow. I don't want to go too deep into it because I can't explain it as well as Detective McNally can.
Dan's a great guest. You're gonna enjoy it. He's a great guest and a great guy.
I was amped up for this, and I'm amped up for that. I mean, I'm really, I've had a lot of, not to toot my own horn, I've had a lot of really cool people I'm glad I've gotten the chance to speak to on this show this week. And I'm not just saying this to blow smoke up your rear. This week between you and him is the most excited I've ever been for my interviews, man. I'm really looking forward to this.
Everything out the door now.
So we'll get to really one of the first major cases that you worked on and helped contribute to, and that is, of course, the anniversary just passed, and I saw you post about it on LinkedIn, as did Chief Anna Moan. February 26, 1993, around noon, everybody's having lunch. It's a winter day, just like this one, kind of dreary out. And underneath the basement of the World Trade Center, specifically underneath the North Tower, Ramzi Youssef and his group of cohorts park a truck underneath in the basement, in the parking garage in the North Tower. They light a fuse, kind of like you see it sounds like something straight out of, the Looney Tunes cartoons, right? When they would light dynamite, but that's pretty much exactly what they did. They lit the fuse, got out of Dodge, and shortly after that, the bomb went off, and 6 people, including a woman and her unborn child, died in this heinous attack. And it was something that you responded to. So take me through it. Where were you when you first heard, and take me through the subsequent investigation?
Like I say, it was a cold morning, and they were stepping up a lot. The department was stepping a lot with community policing. And one of the things that they wanted us to do was go out to the precincts and talk to cops to make them aware of who we were. And so I ended up going to, I think it was the 81st precinct that morning, to do my spiel about this is who we are. Here's how we can help you. And, it's funny, because we're cops and we break each other's chops. You're justifying your existence. These things never happen. All right, well, here's the material. Here's my card. See you later. And, I went, I got a sandwich. I came back to the office. I'm sitting there eating. And it was the last day. The guy I was replacing was an amazing detective, Tony Gonzalez, who went to work for the state insurance fund. It was his last day. I've been up to that point kind of being brought up to date on his cases, going out with him. So I think I had a bite out of my sandwich. The phone rang, and Detective Zulma Raymond, another great detective in A&E, she gets a call from our operations unit. And they're like, hey, a transformer exploded at the Trade Center. And I'm like, well, okay, what do we do with that? It sounds like not a crime.
Unfortunate accident.
Well, whatever it is, it's not a crime. Or at least prima facie, you don't think that. Now, my attitude's that, you have to go back and check, somebody mess with did somebody mess with it or whatever. But this is me again, brand new in the place. And we went out and looked out the windows, and we saw the smoke coming out of the building. And my lieutenant, Jerry Sheen, myself, and Zulma Raymond, next when we got in the car, we raced down to the scene. And we saw all the broken glass and the smoke and all the people being brought out. And, Jerry Sheen's like, this is no transformer explosion. And nothing like that had ever happened in the city before. I think the closest you could get to an event like this is maybe something like an airplane crash, where you've got multiple victims. 6 people died, but thousands of people were injured and being treated. And where do you start? A year ago, I'm running around crack houses doing search warrants in places, and now I've got all these victims, and I'm like, I'm on the catch sheet. So this is my case. I'm like, are you kidding me? I wouldn't even know where to begin with this. So, you take a breath, you start writing things down. And, I was lucky to have people like Jerry Sheehan to guide me through it. But, you worry about it. But, because it was terrorism, the people from the FBI and the ATF, National Response Unit, all came in, and they ultimately take the responsibility. But I can tell you that there was a moment where the chief of detectives at the time was Joseph Borelli. We're in a room with all the detective commanders, and he's asking, who's got this? Who's got case responsibility? He's telling my boss, who's got this? And he goes, the kid. And I'm looking in the room, and the next guy closest to my age maybe has 10 years on me. I'm like, I guess I'm the kid, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I? How do I even start? And
Right.
my lieutenant, like, don't worry about it. The FBI is going to come in the room in a minute and take it away from you. So you got to do a lot of work on it and learn a lot, But I always said, my running joke with it is, did I work on it? Yeah, I made the coffee. Because I really didn't know what to do. I hadn't been trained, about identifying bomb parts. So I was just going through, learning what I could learn, contributing where I could contribute. A lot of it, I was helping coordinate different detective bureau units to come in and assist with the investigation. And I was the liaison with other members of the department in City Hall. Lou LaPietro, who you see on Off the Cuff all the time, he was one of the sergeants organizing that, and that's where he and I met and became friends. But it was just, like I said, I'm running around crack houses a year from now, and now I'm in the middle of, at the time it was the biggest case that ever happened, and there was arrests made pretty quickly. We were, all being lauded. But the big thing is, as bad as once the smoke and everything went away, Mike, the damage was inside the building. You saw all the police and fire apparatus, but you couldn't really see the damage. You'd have photographs in the newspaper on, some camera people would get in and get pictures of it, but you weren't looking at it every day like when 9/11 happened, where every day you're seeing the destruction.
Devastation.
And I think that kind of helped keep calm about it. But it was life changing. It's funny, for years, we had all the pictures in our office about the Trade Center, and every time somebody came in, oh, who worked on that? And it was, a point of personal and professional pride to say that I contributed to that. But I mean, there were so many guys that worked on it, and I had the case in the Arson Explosion Squad. A detective named Joe Burdick in the first precinct, he had the homicides. Well, a lot of big discoveries were made in that case by members of the NYPD. Ronald Longes for the fingerprint unit found on the ticket you get to get your car into the thing, he found one of the terrorists, I forget which one, his fingerprint on it. Guys from our OCCB, or I'm sorry, organized crime auto unit, helped identify the van that blew up. And our mutual friend, Don Sadawi from the bomb squad, he actually found the section of the car that had the VIN that led us to be able to go back and say, okay, this is the type of vehicle it was. Okay. Now we traced the vehicle back to the owner. It ended up being a rented truck from the Ryder Company. And strangely enough, and people find this so hard to believe, but it's true. The bad guys, after doing all this, they wanted to go back and get their deposit back for the truck. So they reported it stolen. And, law enforcement had already been to the Ryder place and said, hey, we're looking for these guys. And all right, if they call, let us know. And then when they call up and said, hey, we're coming to get our deposit back, they called, and law enforcement was all there. And for $200 deposit, they end up getting themselves locked up for the bombing. But the good thing with that was, it happened right away. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing when you have a press case. Once the people see you've got somebody in custody for it, brings everybody's anxiety down a little bit. They feel like something's being done about it, and it's important to do that to give people back their calm. And then as things amp down and calm down, now you can do the other police work that has to get done, because there's not the constant, what's going on? Give me some results. It's like anything else. You ultimately work for City Hall, and they have to answer to the voters, and so someone's going to be yelling at somebody who's going to eventually be yelling at you. So, but it was a very exciting time. I mean, I never worked with the FBI before. I'd never worked with ATF, and A&E Arson Explosion worked a lot with ATF. We had a great partnership with them, and eventually became a joint arson task force, part of the Arson Explosion Squad. But it was probably one of the best times of my life, professionally speaking. Just an exciting time, and you feel good when you're bringing people to justice. I mean, people are like, oh, thank you for doing this, and it made a difference in people's lives. It's also when you see all that damage, you see these people dead, and the funny thing is, I became friends working on the case with a lot of people who worked in the World Trade Center. One specifically was a guy named Vito DeLeo. He was one of the building engineers, and he gotten hurt in the basement when the bomb went off, lost part of his hearing, and he really became an advocate for the people in the '93 bombing. And unfortunately, he perished in the 2001 attack, and probably the saddest funeral I've ever been to in my life. I was assaulted to the earth. Guy in his community that ran all the kids programs, the church guy. Really the salt of the neighborhood, and I miss him. You see the pictures all the time of the Burger King down by the Trade Center with the temporary police headquarters.
Yep.
There was one souvenir he really wanted that never got. That was the '93 Trade Center. They had a Trade Center flag, and I pulled all kinds of strings and I got it for him. And I had to meet him, and I didn't have a lot of time, so we met at Burger King, and I gave it to him. He was so happy. And 2 weeks later, a bombing happened. And then I'm going in that building. I mean, the Burger King is still. I still, every time I drive by it, little emotional thing. I mean, I think about him all the time. I mean, he was a great guy. We would go to concerts together. I mean, he's just a wonderful human being.
And we'll talk about that day a little bit later on in the show. And, Don, by the way, you mentioned Don Sadawi. Don, if you listen to this episode, because he said he would check out my YouTube channel. If you listen to this episode, I just ordered your book. It's on the way. And as you see, I'm chatting with your buddy, Bill Ryan. I'm chatting with another buddy of yours tomorrow. You're next. You're next, Don. Your time's coming, and when I get him on the show, is that going to be exciting? But, one of the things that was mentioned about that, and an FDNY chief by the name of Anthony Fusco made a report of it, is that, the radios really didn't work work at that time. And there's, I'm going to say the F word here, and that's fireman, which I know amongst some police is not popular, but I listened to this other great podcast called Getting Salty, and shout out to them. They're two, much like Bill and Mark, except they're two retired FDNY guys. And they had on Lieutenant Kevin Shea, who responded. He was a member of Rescue 1 at the time, and he suffered basically career-ending injuries that day.
Yeah.
He was with Gary Geidel, who was sadly one of the 343 firemen to die on 9/11. And, the damage combined with the bad signal, Chief Fusco noted that, if the Port Authority Police, which had jurisdiction over the complex, and the NYPD and the FDNY do not get on the same page in terms of communication, it's going to come home to roost. And as we'll talk about later in the podcast, 8 years later, it did at a very, very grave cost to all three departments and to the city of New York. So we accelerate ahead to 1995, which is the signature investigation of your career. And I want to share the screen real quick. Back in time, we're going to go in the Wayback Machine here, folks, on the Mike and Haven podcast. And we're going to share real quick this clip from 1995, a certain detective by the name of Bill Ryan on the case, apprehending a serial bomber who was terrorizing the Jewish community. And he'll explain that to me after a minute and 32 seconds of this.
Fire in Queens may be a frightening reminder that anti-Semitism is not a thing of the past. A synagogue in Rockaway Beach burned early this morning for more than an hour. And now authorities are investigating if the blaze was set on purpose out of hate. Ellen Marks reports.
For the second time in 2 months, a suspicious fire has nearly destroyed this landmark synagogue in the Rockaway Beach section of Queens, and investigators want to know if it was started with matches and hate. The two-alarm fire swept through Congregation Derech Hamuna around 1:30 this morning. It damaged extensively the area between the roof and ceiling of the 2.5-story old wood frame building.
The fire apparently started on the exterior rear. There was a large volume of fire on arrival. Due to that fact, we made it a suspicious fire.
No one was in the historic house of worship at the time, but firefighters carefully carried out what life there was, the sacred Torahs and other religious articles. Hours later, we found Detective Bill Ryan sifting through the ashes looking for evidence of arson. Detective Ryan worked on the investigation of a fire here last July. Are there any similarities between the two fires?
They're similar that they both started with rubbish. They're both to the same building. They're both up in the landing area of the synagogue. Attack the same wall.
Being wired by the shredder. Hurry.
Confirm the first fire being a case of arson.
Yes, we have.
And like the first fire, this one is being investigated as a possible bias incident.
Only because it's a synagogue, it's a house of worship. There has been no anti-Semitic messages left at the scene. There was no scrolls, anything written on the scene.
Congregation membership had fallen off considerably over the years. People had moved out of the neighborhood, or some just didn't feel safe worshiping in such a deserted spot. But somehow the July fire sparked the desire for many to return. Henry Lisker was looking forward to going back.
I was prepared to go back when I heard that the synagogue supposed to be rebuilt. It's a center of hope, and personally to me it meant a great deal.
But he's not convinced the fire was the work of an anti-Semite. Police are looking at another possibility. The fact that this synagogue is isolated and appears abandoned makes it an easy target for anyone who simply takes pleasure in watching buildings burn. So far, police have no suspects. In Queens, Ellen Marks, Channel 11 News at 10.
And by the way, the assistant chief, for those of you that will watch this on YouTube, the assistant chief featured there was a fellow by the name of Dan Nigro. He is now the fire commissioner for New York City. As hang on, let me stop the sharing of the screen as you're hearing something, or maybe you are hearing it, maybe you're not. And pause that and get out of that. So back to Bill Ryan. My apologies here if you did hear that audio. Didn't mean to do that. Anyways, I was saying Dan Nigro was featured in that clip. He was an assistant chief for the FDNY at the time. He later became the chief of department upon the line of duty death of Chief Peter Gansey on 9/11, and he is currently serving as the New York City Fire Commissioner since 2014. But anyway, this case is the landmark, or one of the signature cases of your career. What exactly entailed in this case? Explain it.
The first fire that I had was July 12th of '94. And it was funny because I'd spent the first year in arson dealing with the trade center and kind of, going to training and getting your footing. And I hadn't done a serial case yet. A lot of my guys there hadn't really done that. A lot of the senior guys had retired and moved on. So we had some newer people in the squad. I say new, as new as me. And we got the call out to the fire, and we went to the scene, and we're talking to some detectives from the bias unit. And one of them was a guy named Eddie Schaffberg, who eventually came to Arson Explosion and became my partner. Eddie was a fire chief in one of the, I think it was Oceanside Department, very involved in it. He goes, "Hey, this fire here looks like the fires they're having just over the border in the east to Long Beach Island and Lawrence. And, there's a lot of these fires, and it looks like it's the exact same way it's going on." And although he wasn't in arson, he had such a tremendous background to his fire service and the military service. He it's like, look, I'm not saying it's the same, but it's just, I would think it's probably more yes than no. So I'm hearing this, and I'm like, oh my God, so now I gotta, with that, fire marshals come to the scene and go, "We had a fire here, and we had a fire at the other end of the peninsula to a Jewish catering place." And it was done the same way. When I say the same way, they were taking rubbish, setting up in the back of the place. And he's like, you've got something going on here. So at that point, the working theory was that we had a Long Island guy who was hitting all these Jewish communities in Eastern Long Island, and that he, I guess, had done whatever he was going to do there. And now he decided to come over to the Queens side of the border and victimize people here. And it was just the synagogue was very old. As a matter of fact, when I went to the scene that day, I took a piece of broken green glass. It was one of the stained glass windows, and I said, "I'm going to get this bastard." And I put the thing in my pocket, and I carried it with me every day until I caught the guy. But I mean, you're looking at it, this synagogue, and you see the pictures, it's out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's no houses around it, big elephant grass. And if you go far enough behind it, you're in the water. You're not in an area where you're going to see surveillance cameras. You're not going to catch that neighbor who's on the street at night. There wasn't good lighting in the area. I mean, if you pass this place by, there were people that, there was people in the community that were still praying there, but I mean, for practical purposes, there was no one there anymore. It was, almost, I hate to say abandoned, but it certainly would look abandoned. I think if you drove by it, you wouldn't. You would probably think it was abandoned more than it was active. And I mean, it was just, a big mess came out of it. And then, you're working on it as much as you can. And I started working with another detective, Jeffrey Gardner from Bias. He had just come in from Brooklyn South Homicide, and we were like, all right, let's figure out how to do this. And we were able to get a lot of help from people in the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms ATF. There's a lot of hands on it, but at the end of the day, it's your case. I think I was saying this in one of Bill's shows. I think one of the most abused words in law enforcement is the word task force. They have these incidents happen, and all right, we got to get everybody on, and we'll put a task force together. And when I would look at the task force on paper, you had all the, you had the Nassau Fire Marshals, the Nassau Police, all the different police squads. But at the end of the day, when there was problems with it, I was the one getting put on the carpet, And part of that too, at the time, the bias unit was part of chief of department. They weren't part of the detective bureau. So we were all trying to resolve the case, but we answered to different chiefs. And, they've got to worry about community issues with it. And I'm trying to solve this and going back saying, did we miss any patterns here? Was there any fires in between? There was, I think, one or two that we think were probably attempts that we weren't able to put on them. But it took months, and he ended up hitting 14 or 16 times in Queens. And I was working the case constantly. I wasn't able to get everything done on job time. I would go out on my own time on cases, doing canvases. Whatever I was probably putting in, 30 or 40 hours a month just on my time, working the case, trying to, cover leads and get it done, because it just, it became like that Rubik's Cube. Once I pick it up, I can't put it back down. But as it kept going on, the community was getting angry about it, and rightly so. We actually had a big meeting with Charles Schumer, one of the last fires, and the community was taking the police to task, and I was very happy that people from one of the hotels had burned twice, the Washington Levine Hotel, and they actually stood up in the community and said, "Listen, we admit we're all angry. This is getting nowhere. It's not getting solved. But I see this detective out here all the time. He's working on it. He's giving it his attention. So I mean, let's figure out how to help him, not just criticize him." And I was very happy to see that the community stood up for me with that. But part of the problem we were having was the Nassau guys had a suspect they liked, who was a guy from Long Island, and every time we were able to eliminate him after a while, but every time the fire would happen, the brass were like, "Where is this guy? What was he doing?" And instead of spending the day doing what I need to do, I'm spending the day accounting. I remember the last fire, he sat in his house. He was waiting. I had the coffee out when Jeff Gardner and I showed up, waiting for us. "I knew you'd be here, guys. I saw it on the news." And we Jeff and I knew he hadn't done it anymore. We had followed him for an extensive period of time, and we were able to alibi him and verify some things he had told us. So he wasn't really a suspect for us anymore. But the job hates to hear you don't have a suspect.
Right. Worst thing you could say.
Yeah. What's that?
Worst thing you could say in that spot, in their eyes, of course. But.
Well, I mean, especially you got to appreciate that at this point, it's gone on for 14 months.
Yeah.
And I wasn't getting the heat from my people. They knew I was working, but it's like anything else. Eventually, you don't want the case taken away from you, and that's just an embarrassing thing. And we were all working as hard as we could, and it's funny. When we ended up catching him, he ended up stealing the last congregation that he burned was a congregation Ohab Zedek, and they had like a preschool, and they had a telephone, and by the telephone they had a trust jar. Like if you made a call, you put a quarter in.
Mm-hmm.
And he went in there, and he was a disheveled looking guy, and he went and stole the coins, and nobody in the congregation brought this guy up till the next day. And you go in there, anybody unusual, anything that stood out? And because this guy was around all the time, and it really this taught me a lot. I go to the scenes and like anybody unusual, anybody like this, anybody like that. Instead of doing that, I learned, what? Just tell me who you saw. Don't ask them, see anybody unusual, because this guy wasn't unusual. He was there all the time, panhandling. They saw him all the time. When we got him, they're like, "Him? He's here all the time." Yeah, that's the guy. So it kind of taught me to, just who was there? Who did you see? Instead of, see anybody suspicious? Tell me everybody you see. Tell me everything you heard. Tell me, like, don't discount it. And I had to amend, some of the things that how you ask things, and learn to listen a little bit better. Listening is a kind of an underappreciated skill for a detective. It's so important.
Right.
And once we figured out who it was, we'd gone to ATF and gotten a profiler to help us eliminate suspects and see which we're looking at. And one of the things the profiler told us is he's probably going to be lower socioeconomic. He's probably going to be disheveled appearance. He's probably going to have some kind of a sex crime in his history. And we identified this guy. He actually would go to the synagogue and ask for handouts, and they were pretty generous to him. But eventually, like, hey, didn't I just give you money last week? And nobody wants to be a patsy, and he was calling the rabbi and, "Oh, I need money. And because he was such a pain and they all knew him, nobody brought him to our attention because he was just, oh, that guy, that Brian, the annoying guy. But he ended up being the guy. And when they told us about him, they showed us the checks they were giving him. They would actually write him checks. Here's some money, and he would cash it. Went to the bank on 116th Street in the area, and he was cashing the checks with a welfare card. So it was okay. And then we talked to all the people who were saying everybody would see this guy. We had messed up teeth, messed up hair, dirty guy. And we went to the branch. The tellers were all afraid of him, and they're all talking about his disheveled appearance. So then we got through his welfare, we got his real name and his birthday, and were able to run a criminal history check on him. And he had a sex crime in his past. That the case seemed like it didn't go anywhere, but all the dominoes are clicking. So now you're going through 14 months, nothing. You're getting yelled at, and the next day, this just lands on you. And that's how it happens. All the dominoes start falling, and that night we thinking this guy is from Long Island, and to our shock and some of amazement, certainly mine, he was a Brooklyn guy, and he would take the bus over, and he would actually take the bus to Long Island and do this, and he just, I guess, got lazy and decided he'd stop and do it in Queens. And we got him, brought him in, and we talked to him for hours, and he talked about what he had done and why he'd done it. And, it's a guy that everybody wants it to be, the skinhead, the white supremacist hate group guy, and even the community wanted that. Or if not that, they wanted it to be the guy that Nassau had, who was a Jewish guy himself. And when you saw this guy who was, it's a classic example of a monster that was made. He was the doormat to the world. This guy, I mean, he was abused. He was just horrible things happened in his life. It kind of brought him to the point where he was like this. And I went from imagining a guy and hating the guy to when I finally met him and dealt with him, I felt sorry for him.
Who wouldn't? When you see somebody like that, I do. We're talking with retired NYPD Arson and Explosion Detective Bill Ryan. And before I continue, a quick shout out, by the way, because I interacted with her on Twitter. I found her by chance, and that is Kathy Hearn, who is the wife of retired NYPD bomb squad technician Brian Hearn, who hopefully I mentioned because she commented on a post about the 93 anniversary, and I said I recognize the last name. I said I'd read a book about your husband. I'm going to be having his old colleagues on. I mentioned you and Dan, and she said she'll pass along the message. So Brian, if you happen to see this episode, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for all your years in the bomb squad. So shout out to the Hearns. But getting back to this case, I mean, you mentioned something to me prior in one of our previous conversations that, there was a lot of, as with major cases, and you just discussed it, there's always a lot of politics involved with it because people want to see it solved. It's something that, the longer it goes on, the worse it looks for the city and certainly for the department. But you finally catch the guy. And somebody's annoyed at you because you're not in uniform. You apprehended the guy off duty, I believe, right?
Yeah, it's you look at the we were very big on the bureau, suits and ties, and I spent a lot of time looking for the guy, and the day that the case all kind of came together, we had to go back and call our commanding officer, hey, here's the lead we have. This is what we want to do to follow it up. And, they just didn't want to let me go. I think they thought, it'll wait sometimes. And, sometimes it's a monetary decision. I don't know why, but they decided not to. And I was pretty angry because I had spent so much of my own personal time on the case. And, finally all the dominoes are falling and you're excited. And again, the night before, I'm in this public meeting getting savaged, and then now I got him, and I'm like, hey, this is it. And I said, I got to put my money where my mouth is. If there's a fire tonight and somebody gets hurt, and I said, what, I'm going to go. And it's funny, I was just starting to date the woman who became my wife, and I had to go into the city, and she had some car trouble, and I just, I remember sitting there going, you know what, I dropped her off, fixed the car, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to get this guy. I just couldn't, let it not happen. And I went and I called my sergeant, John Santos. Listen, I've worked on this on my own. I'm going to go again. And John Santos was a great sergeant, knowledgeable guy. He put a leash on me. Look, I'll meet you out there. We'll do it together. Don't go on your own with it. And he was there. He met me in Brooklyn, and we resolved a lot of it. We got the guy, not just myself and John. Bob DeLeon from the 100 Squad, and some detectives from the 100.
We just saw in that video about the that I just share screen.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I was so frustrated that at that point, I done all this work to get him, and then like, you're right here. You can smell him. You can, but I mean, a lot of this too is, sometimes as a supervisor, they got to rein you in. I tend to get, wound up in cases, and sometimes I'm my own worst enemy with that. But
you're passionate. I mean, that's what it is, and it's understandable. I mean, I think nobody wants the cop that, as you said, the NCF, the non-crime fighter. I mean, can that passion get the best of you? Yeah, but as long as your heart's in the right place, I think people can respect that and appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny when I got the guy, and DeLeon and I got him to confess, and he didn't confess to all the fires. I confessed to most of them. And strangely enough, just like in the movie Backdraft, where the guy went, De Niro's character went back and he had his serial guy.
Yeah.
I went to prison and talked to him about the other fires he'd done. And it was I was more frustrated that, like, I had been working on it for so long and so much time, and it wasn't about the overtime to me. It was about the overtime. I wouldn't be doing all this work on my own. I was pretty disappointed that I was so angry about it. I really considered leaving the squad. It was a great moment for me, but it was a tough moment for me because I really felt at this point, I'd only been in the squad, a little less than 2 years. And I felt I at least learned, to be heard out and trusted, and, but that's like, listen, I've done this before with other bosses. If I feel passionate about it, I go out and I do it. My old friend John Nagus from Street Crime used to tell me all the time, it's easier to get forgiven than to get permission. So I've
heard that saying
for my career like that, when it worked. I ended up getting promoted up to first grade, so I guess
it worked out. It's funny you mentioned that. I use that line on my mom. It doesn't work. It's better to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission, and it's never worked. So there's all love you, Mom, but that